And as you can see, there's a slide update in my title. And this updated title of my research today is the crowdsourced Virginia Woolf, multiple voices and retranslation. So to begin with, what is crowdsourcing? To state briefly, crowdsourcing can refer to the act of taking a job traditionally performed by a designated agent and crowdsourcing it and outsourcing it to an undefined, generally a large group of people in the form of an open call. So traditionally, literary translation is of academic prestige. That is, works of literature are expected to be translated by, say, well-established translators or by some literary scholars who are expected to know more about the authors, the linguistics styles, and so on. But today, the novel translation that I'm going to look at is not translated by such academic or professional literary translators. Instead, they're translated by people from an undefined crowd who are in general interested in taking up this role. So, by crowdsourced Virginia Woolf, I refer to this novel collection, including 9 novels and 1 collection of short stories by Woolf into Chinese and published from 2015 to 2020 in the form of electronic books, and then later in 2020 to 2021, this translation was published in print by Huazhong University of Science and Technology Press. And by the way, Huazhong stands for Central China. However, in this study, I'll be looking at this initial online digital version, since, in order to be published in print, the translation necessarily and inevitably went through another series of editing and proofreading, which can be seen as part of the traditional book industry. And I believe that this initial digital version can better represent the crowdsourcedness of translation. And this crowdsourcing is initiated by a platform called Yeon Book Project. And to let you have a brief impression of what it looks like, I put here the book covers of the 9 novels from The Voyage Out all the way to Between the Acts, plus Haunted House and other stories. And now I'm going to talk a bit more about Yeon, the translation platform. Some of you may have known this platform through previous researchers on this platform, for example, by Chuan Yu and Junyang. These previous researchers look at the translation of news items and some scientific articles. However, today I'm going to introduce to you another strand of effort by Yeon, namely the Yeon Book Project, or YGP. So this project is an effort to translate books mainly from the public domain. And the majority of books in this project have come out in the form of electronic books. But at the same time, the project is also engaged in seeking opportunities for paper publications. But in that case, it will very much depend on the publishers themselves. And as for the recompense for translators, if it's a book in the public domain, then the co-translators can benefit from the sales revenue share depending on the copies sold online. This is the introduction to this research. And as for my research questions, so first, can Yeon Book Project be seen as a crowdsourcing platform? I'm asking this question because Yeon Book Project identified itself as an online collaborative translation platform instead of a crowdsourcing platform. And also, as I mentioned previously, the previous researchers tend to refer to Yeon as a collaborative platform. However, I would think that YGP could be primarily recognized as a crowdsourcing platform. And I believe that is not merely an issue of terminology. And my second question is, how does crowdsourcing influence the retranslation strategies on a textual level? To answer this question, I'm going to look at the actual textual outcome of translation and compare this crowdsourced version against the previous classic versions. My third question is, in what way does the retranslation of Woolf's novel collection by YGP add to our understanding of literary translation crowdsourcing? So to answer this question, I'm going to compare the outcome of previous textual analysis, the outcome of question 1 and 2 against the existing theorization of translation crowdsourcing to see in what way literary translation crowdsourcing can add to our understanding and theorization of translation crowdsourcing overall. Yes, so as for my methodology, I'll be doing paratextual analysis of the official website's calls for translators and other promotional articles. Part of my findings come from the actual text. So I'll also be presenting to you a case studies of the textual analysis. So in the existing literature on online crowdsourcing, on translation crowdsourcing and online collaborative translation, it is believed that the main difference between these two concepts or these two polarities of practice lies in the agents who initiate the translation process and where the locus of control resides. That is, in the case of translation crowdsourcing, it is expected that the translation is solicited and that there exists a top-down management of the project. The crowdsourcer can initiate, manage the process of translation, dictate the product design, and direct the crowd to finish the translation within design timeline. So you can see that in the case of translation crowdsourcing, there exists a very strong and imposing control from the crowdsourcer to the crowd, who are expected to follow the guidelines from the crowdsourcer to complete the whole translation. And contrastly, in the case of an online collaborative translation, it is usually expected that the translation is self-organized by the translation community. That is, the whole translation process is monitored not from some superior agents, but instead from the peers in the translation communities. So having talked about this, I believe that Yeon Gutenberg projects can be seen as a solicited translation projects, since if you go to their website, you can see batches of calls for translators who translated the books that they proposed. And if you're interested in one of them, say I am interested in the one to the bottom left corner, the common reader, and I click in. And I can see this interface that gives you some basic information about this book, including the title of the book, the source text author, the source text language, and the copyright status. And it also gives some brief introduction to the books and to the author. And on the right toolbar, you can see 4 buttons. And this two yellow one will let you know how to get involved or sign up as translators or as project managers. And if you click in, you're going to see a link to the sample translations, which we're expected to finish and submit to the platform in order to be considered for the sample competition. So these two websites shows that the YGP projects are solicited, and further, they can fit in 3 entries of this integrated definition of crowdsourcing. That is, there is a clear defined crowd, which is the users of the website. And the crowdsourcer is clearly identified, which is YGP itself. Also, it uses the internet. But still, you can see that there are still five entries to be satisfied. And now we're going to show you a more specific call, which is a call for translators for the waves written by Woolf. And you can see that there is a brackets here, and the bracket says we currently need a translator to translate the first half of the book. Please sign up soon, followed by 4 tildes. This can be seen as a clear statement of a clear goal. And above this bracket, there is a line saying selected translators have been added to the group chat. We no longer wait for the translators who haven't confirmed with us by email. So we can speculate based on this line that the crowdsourcer and the co-translators communicate with one another through email or other form of group chats. So the participated types are assigned online as well. Also, this is an open call made to the public and posted on their website. Next, we're going to see this project introduction, which follows the call on the same web page. So in point 1 and point 2, you can see more information as to how the book is planned to be published. But what interests me most is points 3 and 4 that designates a very clear timeline for translation, which is a time period of 3 months, including proofreading. And it is also made clear to the potential applicant that based on the progression, it is expected that the whole collection can be published in 2018. This can be seen as the compensation received by the crowdsourcer. Then what about the recompense received by the crowd? If you look at the requirements on the translator, you can find in point 2 that there will be a remuneration of 65 yuan per 1,000 words in Chinese. So to me, you can see from this call for translators for the novels of Woolf that this novel translation by YGP by crowdsourcing, this novel translation can be deemed as a project of literary translation by crowdsourcing because it basically fits in all entries of this integrated definition of crowdsourcing. However, despite this, the YGP still identifies herself or itself as an online collaborative translation. So if you go to their self-introduction websites, you can see that the first entry is about the collaborative translation, saying that this is a project of collaborative translation. Doubtlessly, this is what Yeon is good at. And this line is repeated towards the end of this passage, saying that this is a long-term multilingual, open, collaborative translation projects. So now I'm wondering, in what way can we understand this collaborative dimension of YGP according to or over the, or in relation to the overarching crowdsourcing scheme of YGP? And I think that this question can be answered if we have a look into the actual textual outcome itself. So in the following page, I'm going to show you a case study of the textual analysis of the translation. I'm going to show you the translation of this excerpt from To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. But here, the point is not to allow to read through this paragraph, so please don't try to read through this paragraph. What I'm going to do is to show you the crowdsourced version of translation as against two previous classic translation of the same excerpts. And I found that in these two previous classic translations produced in 1988 and 2003, both translators both versions have been finished with one single translator, and both are very what people would usually deem as professional literary translators, because they are both scholars in literacies or even Woolf scholars. So I found that they both use they use two different set of word choices in their characterization of this Charles Tansley. So that Charles Tansley has been depicted as two different types of person in these two versions. The point is that in both versions, there has been a very coherent, systematic strategy throughout this passage. As you can see, the highlights in this excerpt from the first version, and this is back translation by myself. You can see that the strategy is very organic throughout this whole excerpt, from the very beginning to towards the end. Similarly, you can find the translation strategy very coherent throughout this passage as well. However, if you look at this crowdsourced version in 2015, you will find that there seems to be two different understanding or two different strands of interpretation that are mingling with one another and seem to be fighting against one another in this final textual product. And it can be speculated that these two strands of interpretation come from different translation agents who were speculatively having a debate or a disagreement, but who fail to find out a perfect solution to get things settled. And also, it is worth mentioning that like at the beginning and towards the end, the phrases exactly same as the first version can be found, and also in the middle you can find the rendition. The renditions and word choices are identical to this version 2. Yeah, so this pattern of translation reminds me of this picture. So I'm wondering whether in the age of crowdsourced translation, retranslation can become a bit mottled, in the sense that that multiple voices from past translations get mixed together and influence the current translation at the same time, so that it would be really difficult to tell which past translations have influenced the current one. And it would be also difficult to evaluate how close or how distant the current translation can be positioned in relation to the past translations. This phenomenon also casts doubt on the belief that crowdsourcing can be seen as a versatile problem-solving model, a story of cooperation, aggregation, or teamwork that leads to consensus, since this doesn't look like a consensus. And it also questions the belief that groups of people can outperform even the best individuals or experts. I guess that in the case in other fields of crowdsourcing, say in product design or scientific problem solving, this might be the case. However, in the case of literary translation, the inherent endless potentials of text itself would make it a bit challenging for groups of people to find a very perfect solution, since crowdsourcing itself will invite multiple voices and very heterogeneous interpretations into the actual text product itself. And so my argument would be that the translation of Woolf's novel collection by YGP is a clear case of translation crowdsourcing with a strong feature of collaborativeness. This collaborativeness is understood not according to the way in which the translation is monitored and organized, but according to the level of control over textual decision. And a crowdsourced translation project with distinct collaborativeness is less likely to exert control over textual translation strategies and decisions. For example, traces and remnants of debates and disagreements are more likely to be allowed to remain in the draft. And then I also suggest that the crowdsourced theory from media studies and communications is crucial, but might not be enough for the theorization of literary translation crowdsourcing. So to conclude, in this study, I introduce to you the phenomenon of crowdsourced literary retranslation, and my case study is based on the translation of Virginia Woolf's novel collection by YGP. And I suggest that crowdsourcing might influence the actual outcome of the text, since crowdsourcing invites heterogeneous interpretations into the text itself, which to me is a very good phenomenon, because that could be a sign of a very dynamic discussion behind the scene. I also suggest that in order to theorize literary crowdsourcing, we might draw from other strands of theories, as well as from media studies and communications. And yes, this is my references, and this is what I'm going to talk about today, and thanks for listening. Can I stop share now?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks very much. Let's see if there are questions in the chats. Okay, not yet. So in the meantime, maybe I'll ask, so you show a passage that it seems that there was tension between two ways of translating, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I was somewhat surprised, because I would expect if the text is divided among multiple translators, that you would see that, but in different passages, but not inside a passage, like start with one strategy, then another one, and then back to the first. So
Yes, I think I found different understanding of the. I think the kind of traces of disagreements also scatters across the whole translation, but the other text, the other cases may not seem as extreme as in this one. I have thought about other potential explanation for this phenomenon. I thought about the possibilities of the translators referencing different past versions at the same time and consider in what way they agree or disagree with them, and then try to draw strands of understanding and then put things together. But still, that remains on a speculative level because one wouldn't know the actual translation process and how these texts are produced unless you interview the translators. And still, you can't guarantee that the translators will reveal how they translate to you. So that can be a challenging point.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Yeah, at this stage, I'm still reading this text manually, but I hope there can be more ways of reading it, saying through some corpus tool. Yeah, but I'm still thinking about that.
Okay, let's see. There are questions by the audience. Okay, let me have a second one in the meantime.
Okay.
So yeah, you mentioned there is this, the crowdsourced version was published as ebooks. And of course, from a crowdsourcing perspective, that's more interesting to study. And then they were further edited and published in paper, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was wondering, again, going to the passage you've shown that, well, the way you describe it, it would seem that this is not ready to print, right? So if you know what is the process that the editors follow and whether this kind of, so I'm wondering whether these kind of disagreements that would, or this kind of lack of cohesion, let's say, could be solved as a after step, or is such the lack of cohesion that it couldn't be really solved properly?
I think it depends. I actually I also read the further edited version of the same excerpts that I just show you, and I found that no, it doesn't seem to be corrected. But the point is whether or not the point is that despite that, it doesn't seem to be coherent if we read this against the two previous versions. It does make sense to some extent. It's just that the characterization is not as distinct as in the past versions. So you can't say that this is not an understandable translation, because it is. It's just that it lacks some kind of its own how to say this. I think it is an acceptable rendition, just that if you deliberately read it against other versions like I did, you will surprisingly found that there are voices from the past. But if you just look at them, I think it will be okay to read. Yes. And as for the paper copy that you mentioned, I think there are some changes. Actually, some of my favorite bits have been changed, and yeah, yeah. But so I guess that would be that is like an imposing voice from the editing agents from the academic press, who potentially has the I don't know, the responsibility to read through all the drafts and do editing, copy editing, and to make sure that this would be a very readable piece of text. Because I think you can see from the promotional article of the paper collection that it is expected that this collection will be of very high marketability, so that more people are willing to consume this cultural product. So I guess, yes, it does go through further editing. And you can see that they also emphasize that in the promotional article of the kind of semi-professionalism of being a literary translator, that they highlight that that the selected translators at least have some experience in language, like they in translation or editing, or they study translation at postgraduate level, or they have previously translated some other books or stuff. So I think, yes, they did try to present to the potential customers that, yes, what we have done is a very valuable translation. Yeah. Yeah. And also there's another interesting thing that I want to let you know, that because I don't have enough time to present them in my talk. So I think this crowdsourced version is very well aware of the existence of the past classic version, and they try to position themselves in relation to the classic version to demonstrate how this version might outperform the past ones. They said that there are some renditions that are still vague or not very some vague and tricky points has been further explored and rendered, so that this new crowdsourced version would be more accessible. Yeah, so that can be introduced to a wider audience. I think that's what they intended to be, and I think that's overall a very successful project. I mean, the new the paper copy collection, since I think it's much better sold than the electronic ones based on the I just found that.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting to hear about. Thank you. Okay, so it's time, I think. So thanks again.
Thank you for sharing this.
Thank you. So